Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us. The school curriculum has etched these lines into our memories. In our imagination, a pastoral scene instantly emerges. Wise, gray-bearded elders in white shirts standing on the shores of Lake Ilmen. They offer gifts to stern newcomers while the embers of their own settlements still glow on the horizon, voluntarily handing over the keys to their cities for the sake of an illusory greater good. This is the greatest myth of Russian history, and one of the most successful political falsifications of the Middle Ages. Forget that benevolent picture from the textbook. The reality of the year 862 smelled not of bread, but of the stench of burnt hill forts and rotting flesh. What the chronicler Nestor delicately termed an invitation is known by a different name in the language of modern geopolitics: an act of unconditional surrender. The elites of the Slavic and Finnic tribes, the Slovenes, Krivichs, Chud, and Ves, took this step not out of wisdom, but out of primal animal terror. Only one path lay before them: either mutual extermination in the fires of civil war or the summoning of an external dictator. They led a wolf into their home so that he might protect them from a pack of rabid dogs. But who was this wolf in reality? History remembers him by the name Rurik, the founder of a dynasty that ruled 1/6 of the Earth's land surface for over 7 centuries. From him, a thread extends to Ivan the Terrible and the last Tsar, Fyodor Ivanovich. Yet if we try to discern Rurik himself, we see only a ghost. He is devoid of a birth date. His face has been erased from memory. Even his burial place rests beneath a layer of unsolved mysteries. However, it was this Scandinavian warlord, whose name in Old Norse means glorious ruler, who achieved the impossible. He transformed the chaos of tribal feuds into the iron order of a military corporation. In this episode, we will conduct a historical investigation and dissect the anatomy of the birth of an empire. You will learn why Rurik's famous brothers Sineus and Truvor most likely never existed. We will analyze the linguistic blunder that turned a loyal retinue and one's own kin into 2 living people. You will see how this error allowed Rurik to usurp absolute power. A journey to Staraya Ladoga and Rurikovo Gorodishche will vividly prove the dispute over the first capital of Rus was settled not by the ink of chroniclers, but the axes of mercenaries. Archeology will demonstrate layers of fire that speak louder than any text. And finally, we will touch upon the most uncomfortable secret. Rurik did not arrive in a vacuum. 20 years before his appearance, European chronicles already mentioned ambassadors of the Rus people, whose ruler bore the title Khagan. This investigation will uncover what happened to the first forgotten Rus Khaganate and how Rurik appropriated this ambitious geopolitical project. This is not a story about diplomacy. This is a chronicle of how, from the ashes of civil war, on the bones of dissenters, the state is born. The price of this birth is freedom. The payment for order is tribute. Welcome to the year 862. The era of tribal chaos is ending. The time of iron order begins. The year 860. The northern forests of Eastern Europe. If we were to look at this territory from a bird's eye view, we would see a boundless emerald sea of taiga, pierced by the veins of rivers, the Volkhov, the Lovat, the Dnieper. These waterways had transformed into something far greater than mere streams of water. They served as the circulatory system of civilization,
the only roads in a world of impenetrable thickets. But the moment we lower the camera from orbit, zooming in to the ground itself, it becomes evident. These veins have been severed. 2 years prior to Rurik's arrival, an event played out here that chroniclers called the expulsion of the Varangians. The tribal alliance of the north, the Slavs, Kriviches, Chud, and Ves, accomplished what any enslaved people dream of. The tribes refused to pay tribute. The chronicle dryly records, "They drove the Varangians back across the sea and gave them no tribute and began to govern themselves." Think about that phrase, began to govern themselves. This was a declaration of independence of the 9th century, the euphoria of freedom. Local chieftains, the elders of the clans, believed that by getting rid of the northern parasites who took their furs and silver, they would finally live in prosperity. They were mistaken. A state emerged which political scientists define as a power vacuum. The Varangians, for all their brutality, performed a function that the local elites had underestimated. The newcomers acted as arbiters, an external force that suppressed conflicts between tribes for the sake of uninterrupted transit of goods. As soon as this pressure vanished, the compressed spring of intertribal enmity uncoiled with monstrous force. The chronicler Nestor describes this with a biblical phrase, "And there was no justice among them, and clan rose against clan." Let us translate this from Church Slavonic into the language of reality. Clan against clan is not a political debate. It is a total massacre. Imagine Ladoga at that time, Aldeguborg. This was not an ordinary village, but a key trade hub, a gateway to Eurasia that had existed since the mid-8th century. Here, at the crossroads of pathways, the interests of the Finns who harvested furs and the agricultural Slavs collided. As soon as the external manager disappeared, every clan laid claim to control over the river. Neighbor marched against neighbor. Blood feuds, previously restrained by fear of the Northmen, burst into the open. Hill forts went into flames. Archeological layers of Ladoga and other settlements of that period clearly record traces of massive fires. This is the ash of their freedom. Trade came to a halt. Arab silver, dirhams that previously flowed along the Volga and Volkhov, stopped arriving. Merchants were afraid to enter lands where there was no guarantor of safety. The region's economy, tied to transit, collapsed. The local elites found themselves in a dead end. Leaders like Gostomil and other elders, whose names time has erased, realized a terrifying truth. They were incapable of reaching an agreement. Any chieftain who attempted to seize power immediately received a knife in the back from his neighbors. No one wished to submit to an equal. They required an alien. They needed someone who belonged to none of the local clans, a figure with no relatives to avenge and no favorites to indulge. They required a judge and a police officer rolled into one. Then a decision is made that looks like humiliation, but is in essence an act of cold pragmatism. They decide to bring back those they had just expelled. The phrase uttered by the ambassadors sounds like a verdict on their own incompetence. "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to rule and reign over us." The word nariad in the Old East Slavonic language meant not merely the absence of chaos, but specifically state structure, administration. The ambassadors were not asking for protection. They were asking for a state to be created for them because they had failed to do it themselves. But who exactly were they calling? Textbooks tell us about Varangians as a faceless mass, But the delegation did not go to random pirates. The ambassadors went to a specific group known as Rus. Here we approach the key question. Why were the elders so certain the Varangians would agree to return? Why did they know exactly who to approach? The answer lies in facts about which the primary chronicle is silent, but about which European chronicles scream. Rurik was not the first. Before 862, a phantom of a different empire already existed on these lands, a project that the Scandinavians tried to launch 20 years before Rurik. The tribes needed a prince, but they did not know that in the north, a power was already operating that called its rulers by the title of the steppe overlords, Khagans.
The year 839. Ingelheim, the residence of the Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious. 23 years before the moment the Ladoga elders would summon Rurik, a scene plays out in the throne room of Charlemagne's heirs that completely rewrites the chronology of our statehood. Ambassadors solemnly enter the hall. Having arrived from Constantinople as part of a Byzantine delegation, they look like strangers. The guests call themselves the Rus people. Louis the Pious looks upon them with suspicion. Byzantium is considered an ally, but these people remain a mystery. The monarch orders the newcomers to be interrogated. He is interested in their origins and the identity of their ruler. The ambassador's answer stuns the Frankish chroniclers. The annalist Prudentius records the moment with pedantic precision in the Annals of Saint Bertin. It turns out, the people calling themselves Rus belong to the tribe of the Sueones, Swedes, Scandinavians. But it is not their ethnicity that shocks, but the title of their leader. They claim they were sent by a lord named Chakanus, Khagan. A Scandinavian chieftain settled in the forests of Eastern Europe styles himself not as a jarl or a king, but as a Khagan. This is the title of the masters of the Great Steppe. Imagine if today the leader of a European nation proclaimed themselves Sultan or Pharaoh. This is not a random translation error, but a bold geopolitical challenge. In the 9th century, the title Khagan signified a claim to imperial status. The only force in the region whose elites legitimately bore this title was the Khazar Khaganate, a powerful Turkic-speaking Jewish empire that controlled the south of modern Russia and the Volga trade routes. The appropriation of this rank by a Scandinavian chieftain proves, long before Rurik, a proto-state was functioning on these lands. Historians designate it as the Rus Khaganate. The Scandinavians were attempting to create an empire in the east for the first time. They were not limiting themselves to the fur trade. They were challenging Khazaria, declaring equality. The Northmen built a structure capable of conducting diplomacy with Constantinople and the Franks. Louis, recognizing Swedes in his guests, suspected espionage. He remembered how the Danes were tormenting the northern borders of his domains. But these Rus complained that they could not return home by their previous route due to the savagery of very fierce peoples, likely steppe nomads. What destroyed this first state? Why in 839 does it send diplomats to two world leaders only to vanish without a trace 20 years later, leaving behind only ashes and chaos? The reason lies in silver. In the mid-8th century, an economic catastrophe struck, the silver crisis. The flow of Arab dirhams that fed the power of the first Khaganate dried up due to civil strife in the caliphate. Deprived of payment, the mercenary army scattered. The loyal retinue turned into gangs of looters. The Khazars or Magyars struck a counterblow, destroying the southern strongholds of the Rus. The first project of Gorodishche, the country of cities, crashed. The system collapsed.
spawning a power vacuum and internecine strife among the tribes who began to war over the remnants of influence. However, the memory survived. When summoning the Varangians in 862, the Slavic elders were not turning to strangers. They strove to restore the previous order. They required a restorer. But instead of a manager, they met a conqueror. A figure appears on the stage who was not mentioned in the documents of 839, a man from the shadows. According to a widespread scientific theory, this is Rurik of Jutland, an exile who knew of the riches of the East. He has no intention of repeating the mistakes of the first Khagan. Rurik does not seek recognition from emperors. He is coming to assert his authority with iron. So the invitation has been sent. The ambassadors have crossed the sea, and the Baltic has given its answer. In the year 862, 3 Drakars dock at the banks of the Volkhov. Warriors clad in chainmail step onto dry land. Leading them is a man whom history will remember by the name Rurik. But where exactly did he arrive? School textbooks have insisted for decades Rurik came to rule in Novgorod. This version served as the foundation of official ideology for a long time. However, this is a myth. Archaeological data is undeniable. In 862, Novgorod did not exist. On the site of the future metropolis rustled a forest, where only rare solitary farmsteads could be found. Cultural layers are recorded there only from the mid-10th century, almost a century after the calling of the Varangians. Where, then, did the northern landing actually disembark? The truth is held by the most ancient chronicle compilations, the Ipatiev and Radziwill chronicles. They testify directly, and they came to the Slovenes first and built the city of Ladoga. The chronicler uses the term built, but we know the city had already stood there for a century. Likely, Rurik merely established new fortifications or constructed a powerful wooden citadel atop the old settlement. Ladoga, Aldeguborg. This port served as the key to Eastern Europe. Founded back in the mid-8th century, the settlement was pulsating with life by the time the Varangians appeared. Here, the interests of Finns, Slavs, and Scandinavians collided. In the workshops, ships were repaired. In the markets, furs were exchanged for Arab silver, which was immediately melted down into exquisite jewelry. The choice fell on Ladoga not by accident. As an experienced strategist, the leader understood control over the mouth of the Volkhov allowed one to hold the entire regional trade by the throat. Let us look at the personality of the non-comer more closely. Rurik does not seem like a random vagabond. Many historians identify him with Rurik of Jutland, that very Danish konung who for decades held the coast of Frisia and the lands of the Franks in fear. This man possessed colossal experience in governance, knew how to conduct negotiations, and knew how to collect tribute effectively. The Varangian clearly does not trust the locals. The konung constructs his residence not in the depths of Slavic territories, but on the very edge, closer to the sea. Such behavior is characteristic not of a father of the nation, but of the commander of an occupation garrison. The Viking ships are always docked and ready. The Scandinavian arrived here not for the sake of guardianship over subjects, but for the sake of total control. Excavations in Ladoga reveal graves of the northern nobility. Weapons from Jutland and sets for playing Nefertov are found within them. And the recent discovery of a casting mold depicting a diving falcon the ancestral crest of the Rurikids, confirms an elite with state ambitions settled here. The Varangian did not come alone. Tradition holds that he was accompanied by his brothers, Sineus and Truvor. The first settled in Belozir, the second in Izborsk. A coherent picture emerges. 3 leaders divided spheres of influence to manage a vast region. But here lies a serious inconsistency. Most likely, no brothers ever existed. Just 2 years after their arrival, they die suddenly and simultaneously, turning Rurik into the sole ruler. Such a finale looks far too convenient. We are likely facing a historical anecdote that over time became official dogma.
So Rurik is in Ladoga, but the chronicle insists he is not alone. The primary chronicle paints a classic triumvirate. Rurik occupies Ladoga, Sineus settles at Bieloozero, and Truvor takes Izborsk. An ideal scheme formed. 3 relatives, 3 key outposts, total control over the north of Rus. 2 years later, an event occurs that forces any investigator to be on alert. The chronicler dryly reports, "And Sineus died, and his brother Truvor, and Rurik assumed all power alone." How convenient! 2 co-rulers controlling strategic regions perish simultaneously. With no mention of causes, battles, or diseases, the entire inheritance passes to the elder brother. Such coincidences happen extremely rarely. Usually, either poison or a dagger hides behind them. In this case, the true cause was a translator's error. Historians of the 18th century and modern linguists following them put forward a hypothesis that turns this tragedy into a historical joke. We are speaking of a famous linguistic misunderstanding. Let us look at the source text through the eyes of the chronicler Nestor. Working in the 12th century, he was attempting to decipher oral Scandinavian legends from 300 years prior. The monk hears a phrase in Old Swedish describing Rurik's arrival. Rurik kom med sina hus and Truvaring. In translation, this sounds like Rurik arrived with his house and loyal retinue. Sine hus, his kin or house. Truvar, loyal guard. And although this version, proposed by Gottlieb Bayer, still sparks debate among scholars, for our story, it looks flawless. The Slavic ear, unaccustomed to Scandinavian phonetics, transformed incomprehensible terms into proper names. Sinehus became Prince Sineus. Truvar turned into Prince Truvor. The Varangian did not arrive with brothers. The Konung brought with him a private army and his own clan. This changes everything. Instead of a family idol, the rigid structure of a military corporation emerges. Rurik never planned to share power from the start. From day one, he acted as a singular leader. Sineus at Bieloozero is not a brother, but a garrison stationed to control the fur route. Truvor in Izborsk is a special forces detachment blocking the borders with the Estonians and Livs. The legend of the sudden death of the brothers is likely a reflection of real politics. By 864, Rurik completes the primary purge. Autonomous detachments far from the center are no longer required. Centralization begins. The loyal retinue and the clan are pulled together into a single fist. The myth of brotherly love hides the technology of expansion. The Varangian placed posts at key points, west, east, north. He clamped the territory in a vice. However, even such influence was not enough for him. While in Ladoga, the Konung realized he remains on the periphery. This is merely a gateway, not a home. The fortress is vulnerable to raids from the sea, from the very same Vikings as himself.
The main resources, grain and people, are concentrated further south at the source of the Volkov. Rurik makes a decision that defined the fate of the country. He moves the capital deep into the continent. But there, his Iron Order ran into something unexpected: resistance. Rurik entrenched himself in Ladoga, eliminating his competitors. Any experienced commander will confirm, a base at the mouth of the Volkov resembles a powder keg. It is merely a vulnerable vestibule, open to all winds and sea raiders. To hold the country, it was necessary to find its true pulse. And the heart of the region beat further south, where the Volkov flows out of the vast lake Ilmen. In 864, an event occurs which chroniclers, cautiously, term the transfer of the capital. In modern terms, it looked like the seizure of strategic heights. The Varangian prince abandons Ladoga and moves up the river. He does not go to the Slavs as a guest. Rurik chooses an island hill dominating the terrain, an ideal position to defend not against external enemies, but against his own people. Thus arises Rurikovo Gorodishche, Holmgard, the island city, as Scandinavian sagas would record it. Before us is not a settlement in the usual sense, but the fortified camp of an occupation army. Archaeologists find massive ramparts here and a density of northern artifacts found nowhere else in Eastern Europe. Behind high walls settled the elite, Varangians, strangers to this land, ready to unsheath their swords at any moment. And steel had to be put to use. The honeymoon of the invitation had come to an end. The euphoria of order was displaced by the hangover of lost freedoms. The local nobility, those very elders who thirsted for judgment by right, realized their miscalculation. Instead of a hired manager, they received a harsh master. A figure appears on the stage whom official history tried to erase for centuries. The Nikon Chronicle preserved the name of the resistance leader, Vadim the Bold. Who was he? A Slovene prince? A military commander? There is no precise data. However, it was this man who risked challenging the Iron Order of the outsider. The script of the drama is simple and bloody. Vadim raises a rebellion, demanding the return of past liberties. But Rurik has ceased to be a mercenary from Ladoga. Now this is a monarch